The neighborhood looked like something out of a magazine: manicured lawns, pristine sidewalks, houses painted in soft, welcoming colors. A place where kids rode their bikes without a care in the world, where every morning smelled like fresh-cut grass and suburban tranquility. But beneath that postcard-perfect surface lurked something far less charming. The Homeowners Association, or HOA, ruled the community with an iron grip, dictating everything from mailbox colors to the exact length of front yard flower beds. And at the head of it all was Karen. Karen wasn't just a stickler for the rules, she made the rules. A woman in her late 50s, she carried herself like a queen surveying her kingdom, clipboard always in hand, her tight smirk a permanent fixture. Most homeowners had long accepted that it was easier to comply than to fight. They paid their ridiculous fines, repainted their fences when told, and bit their tongues when new community standards popped up out of nowhere. Resistance, after all, only brought more trouble. But then Jake moved in. Jake had no interest in drama. In his early 30s, he had spent the last decade grinding through city life, dealing with honking traffic, overpriced apartments, and neighbors who barely acknowledged each other. When he finally saved up enough to buy his first home, he chose this neighborhood for one reason: peace. No blaring sirens, no cramped living spaces, just a quiet backyard where he could unwind with a beer in hand and, most importantly, his very own pool. It was perfect: sleek blue tiles, soft ambient lights lining the edges, the kind of backyard oasis he had always dreamed of. And for a brief moment, he believed he had found exactly what he was looking for. Then, Karen showed up. She didn't knock like a normal neighbor. She stormed onto his property, clipboard clutched to her chest, eyes scanning his pool like a property appraiser about to deliver bad news. Jake barely had time to register her presence before she spoke. "It's lovely," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I assume you've reviewed the community pool sharing guidelines?" Jake blinked. Pool sharing guidelines? Karen's smirk widened, as if she had been waiting for this exact response. "Yes. We like to foster a sense of community here. It's only fair that everyone has access to amenities like this." She gestured at his pool as if it were public property. For a moment, Jake thought she was joking. He let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. "Sorry, Karen, but this is my pool. Private property." Her smile tightened. "Oh, we'll see about that." And just like that, Jake's peaceful new life was over before it even began. The first notice arrived just 3 days after Karen's unwelcome visit. A crisp white envelope, HOA logo stamped at the top, tucked neatly into Jake's mailbox like an official government document. He tore it open, half expecting some trivial reminder about garbage collection schedules. Instead, his eyes locked onto the bolded text at the top of the page. "Violation notice, unauthorized private amenity." Jake read the letter twice, convinced he had misunderstood. The notice cited a newly enacted community rule stating that private recreational facilities must be made accessible to neighbors upon request to uphold community values. It was ridiculous. A pool sharing rule? What kind of homeowners association had the power to tell people they had to let strangers into their backyard? He tossed the letter aside. This was Karen being Karen, trying to intimidate him into submission. He had no intention of responding, let alone complying. He figured ignoring it was the best course of action. He was wrong. The next morning, a second letter appeared. This time, it wasn't about sharing. It was about safety violations. According to the HOA, the glare from his pool tiles was excessively reflective and posed a hazard to drivers on the adjacent street. Jake stood outside in the afternoon sun, squinting at his pool like an idiot, trying to see what the hell they were talking about. Nothing. Just water, shimmering like any normal pool in daylight. Then came the fine. $200 for visual nuisance. That night, as he sat by the pool, wondering if he had accidentally moved into some twisted suburban dictatorship. He spotted a shadow moving along his fence line. He stood up, heart pounding, and caught sight of Rick, the HOA treasurer, holding a clipboard, tape measure in hand. The man was taking notes. On what? Jake had no idea. "What the hell are you doing?" Jake called out. Rick, unfazed, barely looked up. "Checking for regulation violations. Just doing my job." Jake narrowed his eyes. "You're on my property." Rick grinned. "I'm on the sidewalk." He tapped his notepad. "You'll be getting a notice soon." And he was right. The next letter accused him of owning pool floats that were not in alignment with the community's aesthetic. Another fine. Another $150 down the drain. Jake wasn't the only target. The neighbors who had sympathized with him, like Maggie, the elderly widow next door, suddenly started getting notices, too. Maggie's mailbox was now an unapproved style. Another neighbor was told their garden gnome violated visual harmony standards. Jake was starting to see the bigger picture. Karen wasn't just harassing him, she was sending a message. Then came the final straw. One morning, he stepped outside to find a city inspector standing in his driveway. The man held a clipboard, flipping through papers as he squinted at Jake's pool. "You the homeowner?" the inspector asked. "Yeah," Jake said cautiously. "What's this about?" "We received a complaint from your HOA," the man said. "They're claiming your pool water is contaminated and could pose a health risk to the neighborhood." Jake's jaw tightened. "That's complete bull," he caught himself, exhaling sharply. "And who exactly made this complaint?" The inspector shrugged. "Anonymous." Of course it was. Jake insisted on a test. The inspector, to his credit, didn't seem eager to enforce any shutdown unless there was actual evidence of a problem. So Jake had the water analyzed. It came back perfectly clean. He expected that to be the end of it. It wasn't. A day later, a new letter arrived. This one claimed that his pool lights were too bright at night, disturbing nocturnal wildlife. Another $250 fine. Jake clenched his fists. This wasn't just about the pool anymore. This was about power. Karen was escalating, and if she thought he was just going to roll over, she was about to be very, very disappointed. Jake woke up to the sound of voices near his fence. Groggy, he grabbed his phone and peered out the window. Rick was there again, this time with a step ladder, leaning over Jake's fence with a tape measure. His gut twisted. How far was the HOA willing to go? Storming outside, Jake called out, "Hey! What the hell do you think you're doing?" Rick, startled, lost his balance. There was a split second where time seemed to freeze, his arms flailed wildly, clipboard flying through the air, before he tumbled straight into the pool with a spectacular splash. Jake barely stifled his laughter as Rick resurfaced, soaked, sputtering, and looking like a drowned rat. "I hope that's HOA-approved swimwear," Jake muttered. Rick, red-faced, scrambled out of the pool, grabbing his clipboard. This isn't over." He stomped off, water dripping onto the pavement as he vanished around the corner. Jake exhaled, his amusement quickly fading. This wasn't just pettiness anymore. This was obsession. That afternoon, he noticed something new, a small, black security camera mounted on Karen's fence, conveniently angled to monitor his backyard. He clenched his jaw. She was watching him now. He refused to let her think she had one. If Karen wanted a show, he'd give her one. That evening, he put up a massive, sarcastic sign on his lawn, "Karen Cam in progress, wave and smile." The reaction was instant. Neighbors started laughing, taking selfies in front of it, and posting them online. Within days, Jake had become a local legend, and Karen had become the subject of endless jokes. But underneath the humor, something darker was coming to light. One evening, Maggie invited Jake over for coffee. She was holding a stack of old HOA newsletters, her hands trembling slightly. "I think I found something," she said. Jake sat down as she spread the documents across the table. "Karen tried to push for a community pool project years ago," Maggie explained, tapping a highlighted section. "But it was rejected by the board. Too expensive." She was furious. Jake frowned. "And now she's fixated on mine." Maggie nodded. "This isn't about rules. It's personal." But that wasn't all. The more they dug, the more unsettling things they found. Karen controlled the HOA's finances with almost no oversight. There were multiple unexplained withdrawals, vague invoices, and missing funds, payments labeled as community improvement projects that had no record of ever being completed. Jake's stomach churned. "She's been stealing from the HOA." Maggie met his eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. "And she's been getting away with it for years." The realization was both infuriating and oddly exhilarating. Karen wasn't just a power-hungry control freak, she was a fraud. And now, Jake had a plan. The next attack came faster than Jake expected. It started with another official-looking envelope in his mailbox, but this one wasn't just a fine. It was a formal notice from the HOA demanding immediate action on a serious safety violation. Apparently, Jake's pool deck was a hazardous structure, and unless he fully renovated it within 14 days, he would be in violation of HOA safety codes, an offense that could lead to a forced sale of his home. Jake stood there, reading and rereading the notice, his blood boiling. This was an eviction notice in disguise. He stomped outside and examined the deck himself. It was fine. No loose boards, no structural issues. It wasn't rotting, it wasn't cracking, it was exactly the same as the day he built it. And yet, Karen had manufactured a reason to push him out. That night, paranoia gnawed at him. The HOA wasn't just playing dirty anymore, they were trying to take his house. Before going to bed, he decided to check his security camera footage, hoping to catch Rick snooping around again. What he found was worse. At 2:43 a.m., a figure crept into his yard. The grainy footage showed a shadow moving toward the deck, crouching down, then the sound of wood cracking. Jake rewound the clip, slowed it down. His stomach twisted. It was Rick. He had been vandalizing the deck, on purpose. Jake gritted his teeth. They were setting him up. But Karen wasn't done yet. The very next morning, an emergency HOA-wide email blasted out. It was from Karen, claiming that Jake had been caught tampering with HOA financial records and had embezzled funds from the community treasury. Jake nearly dropped his phone reading it. It was a complete lie. His hands shook as he scrolled through the email, reading Karen's fabrications. "We are launching a full investigation into this breach of trust. The homeowner in question has been engaging in suspicious financial activities. The HOA will not tolerate criminal behavior in our neighborhood." She had framed him. His phone buzzed non-stop, neighbors were forwarding him the email, some asking if it was true, others outright furious on his behalf. Jake had seen enough. Karen wanted war. She was about to get one. The HOA meeting was packed, standing room only. Word had spread fast about Karen's accusations against Jake, but even faster about what he had uncovered. Neighbors whispered in hushed tones as Karen sat at the head of the table, flanked by a visibly nervous Rick and Denise. She was trying to look calm, authoritative, but Jake could see the tension in her grip on her clipboard. She knew what was coming. Jake stood, holding a thick folder of documents. "Before we start, I'd like to address the so-called financial misconduct Karen accused me of," he said, his voice steady. "Because I have actual evidence of who's really been stealing from this community." The room fell silent. Jake walked to the front, setting a stack of printed receipts and financial records on the table. For years, HOA funds have been misused. Landscaping, personal vacations, and a luxury hot tub Karen had installed in her backyard under the community improvement budget. The numbers don't lie. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's face paled. Rick and Denise shifted uncomfortably. Jake continued. Not only that, but Karen has been weaponizing the HOA against homeowners, filing false safety violations, faking complaints, even attempting to push people out of their own homes. He held up his phone. And if that wasn't bad enough, I have security footage of Rick trespassing onto my property in the middle of the night, deliberately damaging my deck to manufacture an HOA violation. All eyes turned to Rick. He turned beet red. I was just... Karen snapped. This is harassment. I'm calling the police. She grabbed her phone, but before she could dial, Maggie stepped forward, holding up a petition. No, Karen. We're calling for your removal. The crowd erupted in agreement. The HOA board had been exposed. Denise and Rick, sensing the inevitable, resigned on the spot. Karen sat frozen as the community she had once controlled turned against her. Someone in the back started clapping, then another, until the entire room was cheering. It was over. Days later, Karen was gone. Rumors swirled that she had moved to another town, possibly trying to worm her way into another HOA. But for the first time in years, the neighborhood was finally free. The new leadership committee, including Jake and Maggie, rewrote the bylaws, ensuring transparency and fairness. The absurd pool sharing rule was abolished, and the days of HOA tyranny ended for good. One evening, Jake sat by his pool, cold drink in hand, watching as neighbors gathered in his backyard for an impromptu celebration. The same pool that started it all had now become a symbol of unity. Maggie raised a glass and grinned. To Jake, the man who fought the HOA and won. Jake chuckled, shaking his head. To the neighborhood. They toasted as laughter and music filled the air. Karen was just a memory now. But the real question is, have you ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA or a Karen on a mission? Share your worst experiences below. Let's see who had it worse.